When my mother died, I thought grief would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching someone else move into her space, her chair, her kitchen, her husband. Claire was supposed to be a nurse, kind, gentle, temporary, but she slipped into our lives like she'd been rehearsing it for years. My dad smiled again because of her. I told myself that was enough, until I walked into our house one weekend and found my mother's necklace, gone. "It didn't fit my style," she said, like it was nothing. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. That's when I stopped mourning and started planning. You don't always scream when your world breaks. Sometimes you go quiet and wait. Months later, when Claire left for her honeymoon, I did what she never saw coming. I restored the house, my mother's house. I took back everything she'd erased. Some people call it revenge. I call it restoration. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after someone tried to replace you, stay till the end. Like, subscribe, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? I kept my hand on my mother's wrist and counted like the nurse taught me. 1, 2, 3. Then the sound stopped. The room went even quieter than before. The doctor nodded once and pressed a button. Someone said they were sorry. I said thank you because I didn't know what else to say. My father didn't say anything at all. He stood at the foot of the bed with his shoulders square and his eyes fixed on the wall clock, like if he stared long enough it would turn back. The nurse folded a blanket and set it on a chair. I smoothed the sheet over my mother's shoulder because my hands needed a job. When they left, I leaned close and said, "I'll take care of him." My father didn't move. I tried again, softer. "Say something, Dad." He didn't. Weeks slid into each other at the house. The air felt stale, like a room that had been closed too long. Condolence flowers browned in vases. The answering machine blinked with messages from his architecture friends. He never pressed play. He sat at the dining table with his old blueprints rolled out, pencil lined up perfectly with the T-square, and never drew a line. I cooked. I tried chicken soup, then scrambled eggs, then anything simple and warm. He would lift the fork, hold it there, then set it down. I carried plates back to the sink and watched the steam fade. I kept the radio on at low volume for company. Jazz from a station my mother loved flickered through the rooms. He started sleeping on the couch in the den. If I spoke from the doorway, he flinched like I'd snapped a rubber band. "Let's walk to the beach," I said one afternoon, coat already in my arms. "For what?" he asked, still staring at the blank paper. "There's nothing to go to." "You have to leave the house sometimes." He rubbed his temple and said nothing. The pencil rolled an inch and stopped. He straightened it carefully, like that little fix would keep the rest of the day upright. I felt my jaw clench. I washed the same mug twice just to keep from saying something he couldn't hear. That's when Claire started dropping by. She'd been on my mother's hospice team, always neat and calm, the kind of woman who knew where the tissues were without looking. She arrived with a paper bag that first afternoon and smiled at me like we were old friends. "I made lentil soup," she said, setting it on the counter. "It reheats well." "You don't have to," I started. "I want to," she said. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged. "He won't eat." She tied an apron around her waist like she'd lived here forever and ladled soup into a bowl. "Thomas," she called, not too loud, just enough to carry. "You should try this." "It's warm." He came to the doorway and stood there, thinner than he used to be. She set the bowl in front of him and sat, not at the head, not in my mother's chair, but close. He took a spoonful, then another. He looked tired in a different way, relief mixed in. Claire met my eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, "See?" When she left, she wiped the counter, lined the spice jars by height, and tucked a stray envelope into the mail stack. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she said. "Neither should he," I said, and felt the heat rise in my face. She returned the next day, just to check in. Then again the day after. She straightened picture frames, called the pharmacy, trimmed basil in the kitchen pot. My father started answering when she spoke, but only to her. With me, he kept the short, careful sentences of a man walking through a room of breakable things. By the end of the month, she was at our dinner table. The first time, she brought a casserole with a breadcrumb top and slid it into our oven like she knew where everything was. "Thomas, let me," she said when he reached for plates. She moved around us with easy confidence, not showing off, just fitting herself into the empty spaces. I poured water because I didn't trust my hands with wine. She served, he ate, and I pushed food around my plate to keep the fork busy. She laughed at his old stories. He hadn't told any in weeks. He smiled at his own punchlines like he'd rediscovered a part of his face. Claire refilled his glass before he asked. When he stood to get the salt, she touched his hand and said, "Sit, I've got it." Her fingers stayed a second longer than necessary. I felt my stomach pull tight. I kept my smile pinned in place. "Thomas, you always make me laugh," she said, light and warm. I looked down and saw I'd bent the fork tine. I set it flat and pressed my palms against my knees until they stopped shaking. A few months later, I saw them at the Saturday farmers market near the Mission. I'd flown in for the weekend and took the long way through the stalls, pretending to look for Peaches. There they were by the flowers, his hand in hers, their heads close together while they considered a bunch of lavender. They looked like any couple, comfortable, private, a small world made of two people's breath. Two women behind me murmured, not even whispering, "Is that Thomas Harper? Didn't his wife just—" The second woman cut her off with a look. I kept walking. I wanted to say hello and couldn't trust what would come out. Claire turned, saw me, smiled like greeting a neighbor. I nodded once and moved past the cheese stall, then the honey guy, then the coffee cart where the barista asked if I wanted my usual. I said yes and held the cup with both hands because they were shaking again. That's when I knew she wasn't leaving. I went back to Chicago for the fall semester and buried myself in work. I kept my phone face down on my desk and answered only when my father's name flashed. Sometimes it was Claire's voice on his line, asking about bills or doctors or what he liked for breakfast. I gave short answers and hung up quickly. The first snow fell. My classmates planned winter trips. I bought a thin wool coat because the old one had lost its lining. I taught sections, graded slideshows, chased buses, slept badly. In January, the phone rang while I was shelving books at the library. "Evelyn," my father said, voice thin. "I wanted you to hear it from me." My heart picked up. "What happened?" "I got married," he said. I married Claire." I opened my mouth and shut it. A student threaded a rolling cart past me and apologized. I watched the cart drift down the aisle, watched my breath fog for a second in the cold draft from the door. "I see," I said. "I didn't want to make a fuss," he said. "We kept it small." "Okay," I said, because anything else would break in the air between us. I hung up when he ran out of words. I shelved 3 more books and then forgot where the pile ended. I went outside and stood by the bus stop with my gloves off, fingers smarting in the wind, until the sting gave me something simple to feel. Weeks turned into more weeks. Envelopes started arriving, soft with padding. I recognized the handwriting from holiday cards Claire had addressed. I stacked the mail on the table and didn't open the ones with ribbon. I told myself I was busy. In truth, I didn't want to see their smiles laid out on glossy paper. My father called to check whether the boiler at the house had been serviced and whether I needed anything from Santa Barbara. I said I was fine. We kept it practical, as if the past year had been an accounting error we could fix with the right form. Then, late one afternoon, my phone lit up with Claire's name. I let it ring. It rang again. I answered. "Evelyn," she said, breathless. "He's at the hospital." I pulled my coat off the chair and started moving before she finished. "What happened?" "Chest pain," she said. "They're running tests." I grabbed my keys, my bag, the first pair of shoes by the door. The elevator was slow. I took the stairs and hit each landing too hard. At the curb, my hands shook so badly I dropped my wallet. I picked it up, laughed once without humor, and drove to the airport without a plan, just impulse and a credit door. By the time I landed, the night had deepened. She met me in the lobby. Her mascara had smudged. She clutched a paper cup like it was proof she hadn't slept. We stood a foot apart. "Where is he?" I asked. She pointed. "They're trying." Her mouth worked around the word. "I called you as soon as—" I didn't wait. I walked to the doors and pushed through. A nurse stopped me with a calm palm and kind eyes I didn't want. The word time came next, and "I'm sorry," and we did all we could. I felt the muscles in my neck lock. I nodded. Claire's hand brushed my sleeve. I stepped away, not roughly, just enough. I signed forms. I called the one friend of his who still picked up. I sat in a chair because the nurse said I should. Claire talked to someone about personal effects. We did all the duties of the newly bereaved, side by side, strangers with the same last name on a clipboard. Morning found us in the hallway with the dull hum of machines for company. A man in a suit stepped out of the elevator and asked for me by name. He introduced himself as my father's attorney, voice low, manner even. "I know this isn't the time," he said, "but a few things are simple and should be said now." He glanced at Claire, then back at me. "Per your father's will, Claire inherits his liquid savings and pension. You inherit the Santa Barbara villa and your mother's sapphire necklace." I stared at the floor tile pattern until the shape settled and I could trust my voice. Understood. Claire's face stayed composed, the old trained calm, but her throat moved as she swallowed. I kept my eyes on the attorney to spare us both the look. He cleared his throat. "I'll be in touch about next steps." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. Outside, the light was too clean for a day like that. I stood by the curb with my coat open and let the wind push at it. Claire came out and stood 3 feet away, not asking for a hug, not offering one. Cars pulled up and left. A woman smoked by the bus bench and cried into her phone. I watched the smoke drift. Claire lifted her chin. He wanted us to get along. I nodded once. I know. I tried, she said, and her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before. I looked at her hand, the one wrapped around the paper cup. The knuckles were white. My own hands were steady now. We'll handle what needs handling, I said. She blinked hard and pressed her lips together. Okay. I walked to my car without looking back. On the passenger seat, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. I started the engine, let it idle, and stared at the hospital doors until the glass stopped reflecting my face. Then I pulled away, slow and careful, like the road was thin and I had to keep the tires exact. Back at the house that night, I opened the top drawer of my mother's dresser and found the velvet box. The necklace lay inside, the stone cool and bright. I set it on my palm until the chill numbed my skin. The room was quiet, not peaceful, just holding its breath. I closed the box and put it back. I cleaned the kitchen until the counters shone. I straightened the stack of mail. I erased a message from a florist offering sympathy discounts. When the phone rang again, it was the attorney following up with details I barely heard. We'll set a time, he said. There's paperwork. Of course, I said. After I hung up, I stood at the sink and let the water run. My shoulders dropped an inch. I dried my hands on a dish towel and folded it twice, edges aligned. That tiny order felt like a decision. I didn't sleep much. I didn't cry. I moved from room to room with the lights low and the windows cracked to the salt air. The house felt different, not because he was gone, but because something in me had shifted into place. I kept my voice even when I spoke, kept my steps measured, kept the door locked. When morning came, I brewed coffee and sat at the table he used to sit at with his pencil lined up perfectly. I set the cup down, squared it with the edge, and waited for the phone to ring again. I remember the smell of lilies before I saw the coffin. The church was full, sunlight cutting through the stained glass in quiet, respectful colors. People whispered, the way they always do at funerals. My father's name floated around me in fragments. Thomas Harper, such a loss. So sudden. She must be devastated. And then there was Claire, standing beside the casket in a fitted black dress that probably cost more than my tuition. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, tissues crumpled in her hand, sobbing loud enough for the back pew to hear. Every sound she made felt like it was aimed, not released. I kept my eyes forward. My hands folded so tight the skin turned pale. The priest spoke about love, legacy, and mercy. I didn't hear most of it, just the rhythm of Claire's crying, the wet little gasps between words like beloved and cherished. When the service ended, people filed past her first. She took both their hands, smiled bravely through tears. When they reached me, they softened their voices, as if I were the distant cousin, not the daughter. One older woman looked me up and down and said, "You must be Claire's daughter." I nodded once. My voice wouldn't have come out right anyway. Outside, the courtyard was buzzing with small talk, camera shutters, fake sympathy. I stayed by the gate until I saw Mr. Dalton, my father's lawyer, making his way toward me with that heavy politeness lawyers carry everywhere. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "just so you know, the villa is yours. Claire can't touch it." It took me a second to process the words. Then I nodded. I understand. But behind him, I saw her. Claire's tears stopped mid-motion. She turned her head just slightly, eyes sharpening behind the smudged mascara. She crossed the space in 3 careful steps, fixing her smile like makeup. "We'll work something out, won't we, Evelyn?" I met her eyes. "I'm sure we will." For a moment, it was quiet enough to hear the ocean in the distance. Then she blinked, just once, and that false warmth drained from her face. Later, at the villa, the reception looked nothing like morning. White tents, crystal glasses, soft jazz humming like a hotel lobby. People laughed in corners holding champagne. I stayed near the garden, carrying trays, offering polite nods. Claire stood under the biggest tent, talking to one of my father's old business partners, Richard Langford. Tall, tan, a man who wore his watch like a trophy. She was laughing. Not the kind of laugh that comes from memory, the kind that sells charm. 2 women passed behind me, voices low, but not low enough. "She's wasting no time, huh?" one whispered. "Guess grief looks different with diamonds," the other answered. My hand tightened around the tray until a glass cracked against another. I set it down before it broke completely. Across the garden, Claire raised her champagne and met my eyes. The smile she gave wasn't friendly. It was deliberate, slow, a toast made out of challenge. I didn't raise mine back. I just walked away. By evening, the guests were gone. The house was quiet again, except for faint music coming from a speaker somewhere inside. I started picking up plates, moving through the rooms I grew up in. That's when I saw it. The mantel, bare. The photo of my parents' wedding, gone. A few boxes by the stairs labeled "Donate." Inside one, I caught a glimpse of my mother's favorite vase, half wrapped in newspaper. I walked through the living room, the same walls, the same view, but stripped of warmth. New abstract paintings leaned against the wall, pale and expensive. The kind of art people hang when they want to prove they've moved on. I was still staring when Claire came in, barefoot, holding a lit candle like some kind of ritual. Her dress was still black, but softer now, silk instead of wool. "I think a fresh start will help," she said gently. "The past can be heavy, don't you think?" I didn't look at her. My fingers stayed on the empty space where the photo had been. "I think the past built this house." Her tone shifted, just a fraction. "It's mine to carry now." The candle flame flickered between us. I could hear the ocean through the window, a calm, steady sound that didn't match the heat in my chest. I stepped back and said nothing. Sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. I walked out, past the boxes, past the portraits she hadn't yet taken down, past the flowers still wilting from the funeral. Claire didn't follow. The next morning, fog rolled in from the coast. I woke early, packed a small suitcase, just enough for the flight back to Chicago. The house smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish, not home. Downstairs, soft music played, something foreign, something she probably thought sounded sophisticated. I could hear her laughing on the phone from another room. I walked through slowly, tracing the walls, touching nothing. My father's study door was closed, locked. That used to be the one place he let no one enter without knocking. I turned the knob. It didn't move. I set my keys on the counter, the same keys that used to open every door in this house, and took one last look around. She appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, her smile bright enough for a camera. "Leaving already?" "Yes." "Take care of yourself, dear." I adjusted the strap of my bag. "I always do." I didn't look back as I walked out. I didn't have to. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to turn, to say something, anything that would give her the satisfaction of being acknowledged. But I didn't. Outside, the fog was lifting, and the ocean looked colder than usual. My taxi was waiting at the curb. As it pulled away, I caught the reflection of the villa in the window. Big, perfect, lifeless. Behind those walls, she'd already started rebuilding her version of our life. Let her. For now. Because I'd learned something that day. The most dangerous kind of person isn't the one who lies to you. It's the one who performs truth so beautifully you almost clap for them. And she thought she'd already won. But I don't lose quietly. I sat in the half-light of my apartment, laptop open, phone glowing against my palm. The message had been written and deleted 3 times. "Hi, Claire. I've been thinking. I might have overreacted before. I get it now. You just needed a new start." It looked polite, harmless, forgiving. Exactly what she'd expect from someone still broken. I hit send. 3 dots appeared, vanished, came back. "That means a lot, sweetheart. Thank you." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed, then I whispered, "Good. Let's start over," and turned the phone face down. Weeks bled into months. Our messages turned into a slow, strange rhythm. I sent compliments she didn't deserve. "You look beautiful in that photo." She replied with hearts and long updates about her new chapter. I smiled at none of it. Most nights I worked late restoring old picture frames. Quiet, repetitive work that made my thoughts line up. Every check I cashed went straight into savings. I made lists, organized files, learned more about property rights than any art student should. Then one evening she texted, "Richard wants to meet you soon. He's amazing." I typed back, "You deserve happiness, Claire." She sent 6 emojis. I didn't send one back. By the 3rd month, she was calling me sweet girl again. She thought we were healing. She had no idea what I was doing. I started deleting old emails, tightening folders labeled villa, ownership, county docs, security. Every click of the mouse sounded like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate. "You really think you're safe?" I murmured once, watching the cursor blink. It felt less like anger and more like focus. Somewhere in Santa Barbara she was throwing dinner parties. People liked her again, at least the kind of people who liked expensive smiles. She posted photos, the villa glowing with candles, a new man beside her. Richard Langford, consultant, wealthy, naive. In one picture, I noticed she hadn't taken down my father's portrait. She'd just moved it to the hallway, behind a plant. She messaged me that night. "Evelyn, I finally feel like life's coming together. I hope you're happy for me," I wrote. "I'm happy for you both." An hour later, she replied, "You should come visit sometime." I stared at her words until the phone went dark. I said out loud, softly, "I'll visit when the time's right." I started cutting back expenses, closing accounts I didn't need, sold a few of my art pieces online. Nothing sentimental, just things I could part with easily. At work, a coworker looked over my shoulder while I sanded an old wooden frame. "You always this focused?" he asked. I smiled. "Lately, yeah." Back home, a checklist hung on my wall, written in careful pen. Villa documentation, security update, moving contacts, lock service. Every box had a small check mark beside it, except one. That night, my phone buzzed with a post notification. Claire's engagement photo. Her hand on Richard's chest, a caption that read, "Love deserves a second chance." I stared for a long time. No anger, no surprise, just a stillness that felt clean. Then I crossed the last box on my list and whispered, "Almost ready." A week later, she called. "Hey, sweetie." Her voice was syrupy through the speaker. "Big news! We're getting married in Greece." "Wow," I said. "That's fast." "When it's right," she laughed. "I wanted to ask, would you mind keeping an eye on the house while we're gone?" I paused just long enough to make it sound thoughtful. "Of course. I'll take care of it like it's my own." She exhaled in relief. "You're such a good girl." "Yeah," I said, smiling at my reflection in the window. "I am." After the call ended, I stood there a moment, repeating it under my breath. Like it's my own. The night before she left, I sat at my kitchen table printing contracts and signing papers. Movers, locksmith, alarm technicians, every one booked under my legal ownership. I double-checked everything twice. I sent one last text before closing my laptop. "Have the best time. You deserve it." Her reply came with a heart emoji. Across the world, she was packing dresses and bikinis. I imagined her humming. I waited until my phone lit up again at midnight. "Landed safe in Athens," I whispered. "Perfect," and shut off the light. By morning, the air in Santa Barbara smelled like salt and fresh paint. The movers arrived at the villa exactly on time. They wore uniforms, polite smiles, unaware they were part of something larger. "Everything marked CD goes to storage," I said. "Pasadena facility. Label each box." They nodded and got to work. I moved through the rooms, steady, methodical. Kitchen first, her dishes wrapped, labeled kitchenware. Then the closets, rows of silk dresses, carefully hung, boxed. The piano bench she replaced with a yoga mat, gone. The locksmith changed each lock while I walked the perimeter, clipboard in hand. I didn't raise my voice once. By noon, sunlight poured through the windows she'd kept shuttered. The ocean outside looked wider somehow. When the last truck door closed, the foreman asked, "All set, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes, that's everything." He tipped his hat and drove off, leaving the driveway clear. I stood in the entryway, tracing my hand along the staircase railing. The wood felt warm from the sun. It didn't feel like her house anymore. I exhaled slowly. The chessboard's mine again. That night, I stayed at the villa. No music, no distractions. Just the sound of the ocean outside and the quiet tick of the hallway clock. I brewed black coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the horizon turn orange, then gray. The house behind me glowed, empty, clean, waiting. I opened my planner and checked the last note I'd written. Restoration crew, Monday. I closed it, leaned back, and let the air fill with salt and silence. She was halfway across the world, showing off her new husband, telling strangers she'd built this life from love. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already gone. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or grief, just control, quiet and absolute. I looked at the villa, the soft lights through the windows, the calm water beyond the cliffs, and said, "She thought forgiveness meant weakness." The waves rolled, steady, certain. It meant patience. Morning slid in with a pale stripe of sun across the floorboards. I stepped into it and kept going room by room, barefoot so the house could hear me. No curtains, no paintings, no trace of her perfume hiding in the corners. Just wood, dust, salt air, and me. I unlatched every window and pushed them wide until the breeze moved through like a long, steady breath. The rooms loosened. My shoulders did too. In the kitchen, a sticky note clung to a cabinet door. 2 words in looping script. Be happy. I read it once, twice, then peeled it off and dropped it in the trash. No ceremony, no speech. I washed my hands at the sink and let the water run until it went cold. Now let's make it breathe again, I said, a small line to the quiet. The van pulled up at 9. 2 restoration specialists, an art restorer, and a carpenter walked in with soft bags and careful eyes. They stood a moment, listening to the place, the way good people do before they touch anything. Morning, I said. Gentle cleaning only. Keep the original wood. Keep the old hooks on the wall. The carpenter ran his thumb along the banister. You want it to look new again? No. I want it to look honest. He nodded. They unpacked brushes and clogs and jars of polish that smelled like oranges and old furniture. I opened my notebook on the counter. Sketches, room notes, tiny squares where paintings should go, and we worked. Dust lifted in soft clouds. The specialists moved like surgeons who'd learned how to be quiet with their hands. I walked ahead of them, opening built-ins, pointing at scuffs that mattered and scuffs that didn't. Every direction I gave came low and simple. Skip harsh chemicals. Leave that dent. Watch the grain. From the staircase, I ran my hand along the banister my father had built. Little crescent marks still lived there where his wedding ring had tapped while he thought. I pressed my fingers to them and kept moving. By late morning, the hallway wood warmed under the new polish. Sunlight slid across it in long shapes and made the dust sparkle before it settled again. I stood under the old family hooks, empty, paint-worn, perfect, and felt the house steady itself. That's better, I said. My voice stayed even. That's ours again. In the living room, a linen-wrapped frame waited on the table. I pulled the cloth back and saw the ocean my mother had painted years ago, blue laid over gray, small flecks of white where the brush had skipped. The edges were cracked and a little yellowed. I'll start with this, I told the art restorer. She handed me a soft brush. Small circles. Breathe while you work. I set the canvas on the easel and leaned close. The first strokes lifted years of smoke and fingerprints. I didn't rush. The house hummed around me. Wood creaks, distant voices, the ocean moving in a slow back and forth outside the open doors. Halfway down the right corner, a signature showed itself. M.H. I stopped. The letters sat there, confident and small, like she'd tucked them in so they wouldn't take up more space than needed. Hi, Mom, I said just above a whisper. I finished the corner, then the sky, then the water. When it looked right, not new, but right, I wiped the frame with a cloth and carried it to the fireplace. Dust marked the place it used to hang, a faint square of memory. I lifted the painting into that square and set the wire on the old nail. It settled with a quiet click. The light caught the brushwork and the sea flashed at me from 2 directions, canvas and window, so fast I almost laughed. I took a step back and let the room hold it. Welcome back, Mom, I said. After lunch, I walked into my father's study. The door had stuck for months, swollen with sea air, and it groaned once and gave. Dust lay thick on the drafting table, covering the drawers where he kept his rulers and mechanical pencils. I rolled my sleeves and pulled a clean cloth from my pocket. 1 line at a time, I wiped the table. The grain came up slow and proud. In the bottom drawer, I found the old triangle, the steel scale, the pencil sharpener that caught shavings like soft brown curls. In the corner, a roll of paper leaned against the wall. I pulled it open and smoothed it with my palms. Half the blueprint of the villa unfurled. The stairs, the balcony, the study itself, his notes on the margin, tiny arrows, neat print, the word reinforce circled twice. I pinned it to the wall above the table and stepped back. For a second, I could see him standing the way he always did, weight on one hip, hand hovering over the page before the line landed. The memory slid through before I could stop it. Details tell the truth, Evie. Always mind the lines I am, Dad, I said. I lined his tools where they belonged. Scale, triangle, pencil, eraser, each in its place, each angle pointing home. The room felt balanced again. No ghosts, just work waiting. Evening came soft and gold. I sat at the desk with my laptop and pulled up the Malibu Estate Rental Agency. The form shook loose line by line. Property title, Harper Villa, oceanfront. Description, a restored coastal home honoring its original architecture. The photo folder waited. I clicked through the shots I'd taken. The clean hallway, the reclaimed wood, the ocean framed by open doors, the painting back where it belonged. I uploaded them all and watched the little bars fill, one after the other. The price field blinked. I typed $14,500 per month. My phone rang before I could close the tab. "This is Dana from Malibu Estate," a woman said, crisp and cheerful. "We saw your listing." "It's stunning. Thank you." "It'll lease in a week, maybe less." "That's fine. Please handle it quietly." "Of course." We hung up. I made tea. The steam rose in a neat white column and then vanished. I took the mug to the living room and sat on the arm of the couch for a while, just listening to the house breathe. "It's done," I said, and I didn't mean the form. 3 mornings passed. I polished doorknobs. I oiled the piano hinge she'd left squeaking. I walked the lot line twice to check the fence. And then the email landed. Payment received, $29,000. I felt my breath find a rhythm and stay there. I opened the banking app and watched the number settle into place. Not a gift, not luck, just cause and effect. I set up a transfer and typed the name carefully. The Margaret Harper Art Fund. Half went there without hesitation. The other half stayed. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pour champagne. I shut the laptop and touched the table with the flat of my hand, as if to say, "Good work," to the wood that held all of this up. "Justice doesn't always make noise," I said. The afternoon slid toward blue-gray. The crew packed their bags and left with quick goodbyes that didn't break the quiet. I locked the door behind them and stood for a minute with my forehead resting against the cool wood. My shoulders were lighter. My hands were steady. I walked the house one more time. The living room held the painting like it had never left. The hallway hooks waited for coats that would actually belong. The study glowed with a calm that felt earned. In the kitchen, the trash bin sat under the sink, the lid closed over paper and glue and one peeled sticky note that didn't belong to me. Outside, the ocean crashed politely against the rocks. Night came in piece by piece from the water's edge, and I let it in. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window with a mug of tea. No music, no phone. The light stayed low. The house answered with warmth and quiet, like a friend who doesn't need me to talk to know I'm here. My mother's painting caught the lamplight and softened. My father's tools made a straight line into the dark. The air was clean, with a small hint of lemon oil and sea salt. I turned my head slowly and took it all in, not to memorize it, but to confirm it. The corners, the floor, the quiet, my breath. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I let the calm settle the way tidewater fills a shallow pool and holds steady. This was the part no one saw in the stories. Not the fight, not the sting. The part where you remove what doesn't belong and put back what does, inch by inch, until the space reflects the truth again. I lifted the mug and felt the heat against my palms. "It's quiet again," I said, barely above the waves, and I knew it was mine. We landed in Santa Barbara on the same wind that carried their plane. I didn't go to the villa. I didn't need to. I sat by my apartment window with a cup of tea and listened to the recorded waves looping from a small speaker. The line stayed open on my phone, ready if it rang, quiet if it didn't. I pictured the gate, the gravel, the lavender. I pictured the look on her face when the remote did nothing. Later, she called. Not yet. First came the messages that never reached me. Intercom static, keypad taps, the little panic that grows when a lock refuses a key you swear belongs to you. I let the tea cool and watched the traffic slide down the street like it didn't care about any of this. It didn't. When the phone finally rang, I answered on the second beat. "Hi, Claire." "Why can't I get into my house?" She skipped hello. Her breath came fast. I could hear wind, maybe the ocean, maybe the road. I kept my voice even. "Because it's not yours." Silence. Then a small, angry laugh. "Don't play games with me. You said..." "I said I'd take care of it," I told her, like it was my own. She swallowed. The pause stretched until it almost broke. "You had no right." "Actually," I said, "I had every right." "Check the deed." "Don't talk to me like I'm not talking at you," I said. "I'm telling you the truth." She tried to rally. "You think you've won something? "No, Claire," I said. "I didn't win. I just cleaned up." For a heartbeat, she didn't know whether to scream or beg. I could hear Richard's voice somewhere behind her, low and sharp, asking questions she didn't want to answer on speaker. She chose pride. Of course she did. "You can't do this to me," she said, quieter. I ended the call. Not loudly, not with a speech. Just a soft click that put my apartment back the way it was. Still, warm. Mine. Hours earlier, they'd come up the drive in a silver SUV, music turned too high for a neighborhood that prefers the sound of water. I didn't see it with my eyes. I didn't have to. I knew how it would play. Her laughter, the kind that's meant to be heard. The rings catching sunlight from the windshield. "Wait till you see the renovations I want next," she'd say. "That kitchen is begging for marble." I could hear him teasing. "Let's just relax for once," and her airy answer, "Relaxing is a project." Gate remote. Nothing. Second press. Nothing. She'd force a smile for him. He'd say, "Batteries, maybe?" She'd say, "They were new," like the remote had betrayed her on purpose. He'd offer to jump the gate. She'd refuse and call a company that didn't recognize her name. Then the climb over the side fence, her heels slipping on the crossbar, a graceless landing that yanked a sharp sound from her throat. The yard smelling like cut lavender and sea air, the front steps clean, the lock cold, the key wrong. "Of course it's the right one," she'd snap when he asked. Metal against metal, a scrape that said no. The alarm voice, calm as a concierge, system armed. "What the hell?" she'd start, and the door would open to a man in a soft shirt and bare feet, blinking at her like she'd walked into his kitchen by mistake. "Can I help you?" he'd ask, polite but firm. "This is my home," she'd say, chin up. "I'm sorry?" "I'm the owner," she'd state, "Claire Langford. This is my house." And he'd tilt his head like he was choosing between kindness and fact. "No, ma'am," he'd say finally. "We rent this house." From Evelyn Harper. That's the line that splits something open. It's not the volume, it's the simple shape of it. She'd step back and whisper, "That's impossible." Back in my apartment, I put the cup in the sink and turned on the tap. The water ran clear. I let it run an extra second, then shut it off. The waves in the speaker kept their rhythm. I didn't look at my phone until it rang again. The officers had arrived by then, their lights washing the driveway in blue. I didn't need to hear the script to know it. "We've checked county records," one would say. "The property belongs to Evelyn Harper." She'd try a different angle. "She tricked me. She stole my things." The second officer would keep his voice neutral. "Everything was moved to a storage unit under your name, Pasadena." The word "under" would land hard. It's a word that means someone handled something you left messy. By then, Richard would have stepped away from the argument, ring glinting under the lights, hands in his pockets like a man deciding whether to stay for the end of a bad play. He'd look at her and lower his voice. "You said it was yours," he'd say. "It was! I lived there!" "Living there isn't owning it," he'd answer. Not mean, not kind, just tired. Then the keys in his hand, the car door opening, the taillights fading back down the hill, red as a closing door. "Speak to your attorney," an officer would suggest. "There's nothing criminal here." And they'd leave her at the gate with the ocean wind tugging at her hair and the mascara that was never waterproof enough for real life. She would stand there a minute, staring at a house that didn't speak her name anymore, and say to the empty street, "She took everything." My phone buzzed with a text from the tenant. "All good, they're gone." I typed, "Thank you," and set the phone face down again. People think triumph is loud. It isn't. It's the soft closing of a door after the shouting is over. It's the way your own breath sounds when you don't have to hold it for anyone else. Across town, traffic thinned. I opened the window a couple inches and let the city air mix with the recorded sea. The two sounds didn't fight. They folded into each other like they'd been waiting. I thought of my mother's painting where it hung above the fireplace now, clean again, the varnish catching late light. I thought of my father's blueprint pinned to the study wall, lines steady and exact. I thought of the staircase railing under my hand, the small dents left by years of living right where your palm wants to rest. All the quiet truths that don't need to be announced. The phone rang once more. I didn't recognize the number. I let it go to voicemail and didn't listen. I rinsed the cup, turned it upside down on the rack, and wiped the counter in a slow, even line. The night settled without asking for permission. After a while, I moved back to the window and sat. The speaker waves rolled and rolled. I didn't turn them off. I didn't grin. I didn't rehearse what I would say to anyone later. There wasn't anything to say. I didn't think about her face when she heard the tenant say my name. I didn't think about the way she reached for her old keys out of habit and found only metal that didn't fit. I didn't think about Richard's silence or the officer's careful patience. I stayed with the one thing that mattered, the clean line between what belongs and what doesn't. Somewhere past midnight, the phone lit up with a last text I didn't open. I watched it fade. I watched the room dim. I let the city hum and the ocean loop, steady and low. People will call it revenge. People always do when a woman stops apologizing. I set the phone on the table, screen down, and leaned back until my shoulders touched the chair and stayed there. The room didn't ask for noise. The night didn't want a story. It wanted air and proof. I gave it both. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, just to listen. The tea had gone cold, but the warmth in the room held. The sound of the waves kept time I could follow without looking at a clock. I didn't imagine tomorrow. I didn't plan another move. The work for this day was finished. The rest was quiet. I breathed in, I breathed out. And for the first time in a long time, nothing fought me for the space. Morning slid into the studio like it knew the address. Light cut through the big windows and laid itself over the dust, over the work tables, over the mess I'd chosen for myself. I pushed open the door, and the little bell I'd hung from a nail knocked once against the glass. The sign above the entrance read, Harper Studio and Restoration, in simple black letters I'd painted by hand. No flourish, just the name. Maya beat me there. Her hair was up, her sleeves were rolled. She had a frame on the table and a look almost like worry. "This piece, 1920s oak, right?" she asked without looking up. "Good eye," I said. "Don't strip it too far. Leave the story in the wood." "Got it." I pulled on gloves, opened the jar of polish, and felt that familiar citrus hit. The small gilded mirror from a church lot sale waited under a sheet of butcher paper. I lifted it, felt the weight, and started in on the flaking leaf with a soft brush. The first strokes made me breathe slower. The second set made my hands steady. In the glass, I caught my reflection, sweat at my hairline, a smudge on my cheek, eyes that didn't look tired from outrunning someone else's mess. Maya glanced over. "You're kind of a perfectionist, huh?" "No," I said. "I just like when things find their shape again." She smiled and went back to work. Sanding started up on the far table. Metal clinked softly as she set down a file. Outside, delivery trucks muttered and then moved on. Inside, the smell of old wood, glue, and coffee did what it always did, knocked the world into one room I could manage. By lunchtime, I had the mirror cleaned and the cracks filled. I brushed a new layer of leaf into the thin spots and pressed it down with breath and patience. It held. Sometimes the smallest fix holds the loudest. My laptop chimed from the office corner. I wiped my hands, stepped over a stack of salvaged chair legs, and opened the lid. The email subject hit like a clean cord. Harper Villa, payment received. Amount? $29,000. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been keeping. Not a laugh, not a sigh, just a simple exhale that settled everything 2 inches lower in my chest. Next to the laptop sat a legal pad where I'd drawn boxes and arrows. I checked 3 items with the tip of a pen. Harper Studio payroll, Margaret Harper Art Fund, student loans, cousin, Lily. Numbers moved from one account to another with a few quiet clicks. Maya stood in the doorway, sipping from a chipped mug. "That another commission payment?" "Something like that," I said, and kept the smile small. I pushed back from the desk and looked out at the skyline, glass and angles stitched together over blocks of fast decisions. It used to make me restless. Today, it just looked like weather. "Peace looks expensive," I said under my breath, and went back to the tables. An hour later, a courier dropped an envelope on the front counter. Heavy paper, embossed crest, the kind of thing meant to be kept. I cracked the seal and read, "The Los Angeles Restoration Guild, Annual Showcase Invasion." Maya reached for it with both hands like I'd handed her cake. "That's a big deal, Evelyn." "It's just an invitation. No one gets one of those just because." I ran my thumb over the embossing. The paper had a ridge that caught on my nail. I set it aside, picked up the mirror instead. The glass showed me straighter than it had that morning. Maya watched me polish the edge. "You restore more than objects." "That's the goal," I said. I meant it. I didn't say for who. The afternoon tilted toward gold and we closed the front gate halfway to let the air in and the street out. I answered a call from a client with a warped dining table. I scheduled pickups and tapped a quick list in my phone. White cloths, gloves, shellac, mat. Somewhere in there I realized my shoulders didn't hurt and my jaw wasn't tight. It wasn't joy, it was relief with a spine. That night, I drove to a storage facility in Pasadena. The fluorescents buzzed like they had all the time in the world. Rows of boxes labeled C. Langford lined one corner, neat and indifferent. A small crowd gathered for the auction. Resellers with phones out, a couple in matching hats, a woman who whispered every bid to herself like a prayer. The auctioneer started in on the lots. Dresses first, then kitchenware, then framed travel photos with water lines across the glass, each city smiling the same smile. A fake marble Buddha went for $50 to a man who kept scratching the back of his neck like he had an itch no one else could see. Numbers climbed. Then the total flashed on the screen across the room. $95,000. The auctioneer walked over. "Do you want me to transfer the funds?" "Half to the Breast Cancer Research Alliance," I said. "The rest, back to her account. Let her decide what to do with it." He raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "We'll handle it." I turned for the exit. The hum of fluorescent lights followed me down the hall. I didn't look back at the boxes. The air outside tasted like hot concrete and jet fuel from somewhere overhead. "That's the difference between us," I said to no one, and the sentence felt done. The next day I walked into a small jewelry store tucked between a plant shop and a tailor. No guards, no spotlights. The cases were clean and the woman behind the counter wore a sweater with a loose thread at the cuff. She smiled like she meant it. "Looking for anything in particular?" "Vintage," I said. "Something that lasts." She opened a tray lined in velvet. "This one's 1940s. Emerald. Silver setting. Simple, strong." I slipped it on. It didn't fight my knuckle or spin once it was in place. I held my hand up to the glass. The stone caught light and then kept it. "It suits you," she said. "It's something worth keeping," I answered. I paid in cash and left the receipt on the counter. Outside, the city moved at its usual speed, but everything in me was at a slower setting. On the sidewalk, I looked at my hand again. The ring sat there like it had been waiting. "That'll do," I said, and tucked my hand into my pocket like a person who didn't need to prove anything. Evening found me at a rooftop bar with Ethan. No scene, no flash, just a view and a table that didn't wobble. He reached across and thumbed a smudge of gold leaf off my wrist. "You've got work on you," he grinned. "It follows me home." He lifted his glass. "So, you turned revenge into revenue?" "No," I said, and let the smile show. "Recovery." He laughed. "There's a difference? One keeps you angry, the other lets you rest." We ate simple food. He told a story about a client who wanted a mural of their dog and 3 sunrises. I rolled my eyes in the right places. He asked about the studio, and I didn't talk about money or papers or what it took to get here. I talked about the mirror, about Maya's good eye, about the oak frame that smelled like old rain when we sanded it down. He raised his glass again, softer this time. "You're not rebuilding," he said. "You're free." Warmth hit my chest like a good drink. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We sat with the skyline for a minute, and I listened to the sound of people living their lives 50 stories below. Back at the studio after dinner, I turned on one lamp and left the others off. Shadows filled the corners. The sign on the glass door glowed faintly from the streetlight outside. I walked through the room, touching the things that would need my hands in the morning. Polish rags set aside, brush bristles fanned, a can of shellac cool under my palm. My phone buzzed with an email from Los Angeles Art Journal asking for a feature. I didn't open it. I set the phone face down on the table and let the room be a room. Maya had left a note on a scrap of craft paper. "You did good today." I smiled at the grammar and pinned it to the corkboard anyway. I locked up and stepped into the night. The city didn't roar. It breathed. I slid the ring around my finger and felt the small scrape of the setting against skin, the kind of reminder that doesn't shout. A bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Somebody laughed hard enough to bend over outside the bodega. Wind moved through the alley and took the day's heat with it. My phone buzzed again. Bank confirmation, studio payroll sent. I felt the relief hit and then move on, replaced by something lighter. Not pride, not payback, just the sense that the ground under my feet belonged to me in a way it hadn't for a long time. On the walk to my car, I passed a storefront with a mirror in the window. I caught my reflection and paused, just long enough to check if the woman looking back matched the one I felt. Hair loose, shoulders down, eyes that didn't track for threat. The emerald, small and certain. "You're kind of a perfectionist," Maya had said. "No," I'd told her. "I like when things find their shape again." I carried that line with me to the curb, set it down with the keys, and got in. The engine turned over without complaint. The city made room for me. I drove home with the windows cracked, the night air moving through. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation for the quiet. Soft jazz warmed the loft before anyone arrived. I moved plates the way I like them, close enough for passing, not crowded. Roasted vegetables went down first, then lemon pasta, steam lifting in small curls. A bottle of white stood by the window, breathing like it needed a minute. Lily came in with flowers and a nervous smile. Maya followed with a bakery box, and Ethan locked the door with his hip because his hands were full of bread. We talked over each other on purpose. Lily wanted to know about the new studio interns. Maya teased me for labeling the spice jars. Ethan lit the candles and kissed my temple like he'd been doing it forever. On the shelf above us, my mother smiled in a frame with a paintbrush in her hand. Another frame held the villa in late light. I didn't stare at either. They were just there, like air. When the table got quiet enough to hear forks, I lifted my glass. "To Margaret Harper," I said, "the woman who taught me strength." Lily blinked hard, then drank. My throat went tight for a second. I swallowed through it and passed the bread. Later, when the plates were pushed aside, Ethan leaned close. "You did good, Evie." "I finally built something that stays," I said. "I meant the table. I meant the night. I meant me." The next morning, the studio woke up easy. Sun through tall windows, soft footsteps, tools in little clinks. Maya stood with 2 new apprentices and handled a century-old painting like it might tell her a secret. "Always with gloves. Always with respect," she said. I nodded and kept walking. An antique violin waited for a new bridge. A stained glass panel leaned against a padded wall. An old architectural sketch breathed under fresh glass. On the far wall, we'd stenciled a line in clean letters. "Everything valuable deserves protection. MHI. Touched the period with my fingertip like a habit. A woman came in holding a damaged family portrait, eyes tired but hopeful. "Someone told me you don't just restore objects," she said. "You restore stories." "We try," I said. I watched her hands relax when she placed the painting on the table. Around noon, I stepped back, listened to the buzz, and felt the same thing I'd felt at the loft. Nothing to fix, everything to tend. "This is what home looks like," I said, too quiet for anyone to answer. In the afternoon, I sat across from my therapist. Her office was soft in every way, chairs that didn't judge, a window that held sun without shouting about it. "You've rebuilt a lot since we last spoke," she said. "I just learned to stop fixing what wasn't broken," I told her. She tilted her head. "You didn't retaliate. You reclaimed. That's all I ever wanted." She watched me for a second, then smiled. "You seem lighter." "I am." We were quiet. My shoulders didn't creep up like they used to. I looked at the window frame, the neat paint line, and felt steady in my seat. "And now?" she asked. "Now I keep going." That evening, I unlocked the door to my new condo and let the quiet fall across the floor. Open plan, pale walls, soft shadows in the corners. Boxes stacked, but not a single one leaned. I set a framed photo of my parents on a shelf, my mother mid-laugh, my father mid-sketch. Then I hung the small emerald ring in a shadow box by the door. Not a trophy, a reminder. Ethan came in with a fern. For the corner. Something alive. Perfect. We set it by the window together, hands brushing once. He checked the room with his usual slow gaze. "It feels like you." "It should." I paid for it with peace. We stood in the kind of silence that doesn't need mending. The sun laid a flat gold line across the floor, then slipped away. "This time, I'm not rebuilding from loss," I said. He nodded like he knew. On Saturday, we drove the coast with the windows down. Wind tangled my hair. I didn't fix it. We turned off near a bluff and walked until the ocean spread so wide it loosened my chest. A wooden sign by the scrub read, "Lot 7, pending sale." Ethan unfolded a small paper map. "You sure?" "It's far from everything. That's the point." I crouched and pressed my palm to the dirt. It held, cool and solid. "For later," I said, "when life slows down." "What'll you build?" "Something honest. Something that lasts." The wind moved through the grass. Salt carried up the hill and into my lungs. I watched the water until my eyes stung and didn't wipe them. "Maybe one day," I said, "we'll build something together." He slid the map back into his pocket. "I'd like that." Back in the city, night took its time. I sat by the condo window with a glass of wine and watched the lights blink in steady rhythms below. On my desk, a thin portfolio labeled Harper Restoration Projects sat beside a small donation receipt, Breast Cancer Research Alliance, $25,000. I didn't pick either up. I didn't need to touch them to know. I lifted the glass. The reflection of the skyline trembled inside it. I put it down because I hate when things feel fragile. "Hi, Mom," I said to the photo on the shelf. "I did it. Not to win, just to make it right." My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. Outside, the skies shifted toward violet, and the sound of traffic softened into a long, even line. I leaned back and let my body remember that stillness is allowed. The phone buzzed with a message from Lily. Dinner leftovers saved my whole week. I smiled. Maya sent a photo of the apprentices holding the cleaned painting, gloved and proud. "They're getting it." I typed back a single heart and set the phone face down. I turned my head and took in the room the way I do with finished work. Corners, seams, light on the edges. The fern held its green in the last of the sun. The ring in the shadow box caught a sliver of streetlight and gave it back without a show. My breath stayed even, the kind of even you earn. People think closure is a door slamming. It isn't. It's all the doors you can leave open without fear. The hallway to the bedroom, the cabinet with the good glasses, the part of yourself you don't lock anymore. I stood, stretched, and felt the weight of the day leave my shoulders like a coat. I rinsed the glass and set it upside down to dry. I straightened the portfolio so it aligned with the edge of the desk. Small things, clean lines. I went back to the window. The city kept its pulse. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. Somewhere a couple argued, then laughed, then went quiet. Somewhere a train pushed through its schedule like it would tomorrow and the next day. I rested my palm on the cool glass, then pulled it back when it fogged my reflection. Enough. I'd had enough fog for a lifetime. I looked at my mother's picture again, the paint stain on her wrist, the way she's forever mid-sentence in that frame. My throat tightened and then let go. "Thank you," I said. To her, to the table, to the hands that remember what fixing requires. My chest felt warm, not heavy. The night had no corners I didn't trust. I took one long breath and let it show me the end of this day. "Closure isn't silence," I said into the room. "It's gratitude." I didn't write it down. I didn't practice it. I let it stand on its own feet and walk the quiet house, touching nothing, needing no proof. Outside, the sky held. Inside, I did too. The sun was already up when I hit the coast road. Same one I'd driven years ago. Same sharp turns. Same ocean smell that never really leaves your clothes. My hand rested over the curve of my stomach. The other held the wheel steady. On the passenger seat, a bundle of white tulips leaned against the paper bag like they were listening. Ethan's voice filled the car. "Sure you don't want me to come?" "It's something I should do alone," I said. "Just a visit." He laughed softly. "You never do just anything. Drive safe. I'll see you tonight." "Promise," I said, and ended the call. The road dipped and climbed. The water flashed silver beside me. I remembered every mile from before, when it used to feel endless. Now it felt smaller, manageable. When I reached Santa Barbara, the air was heavy with lavender and sea salt. The villa's gates were open this time. The house stood bright, its windows clear. A different car in the driveway, voices spilling out like sunlight. A family, a man, a woman, a kid with a red ball. Their laughter moved through the garden like it belonged there. I parked down the road and took the tulips in both hands. My legs felt steady, not like before. I walked only as far as the gate post. The smell of olive trees, the sound of someone playing piano from inside, the same notes my mother used to hum when she cleaned. I bent down and laid the tulips against the stone. "You can rest now," I said. That was it. No drama, no tears, just quiet, the kind that tells you the work's been done. I turned back toward the road, didn't look behind me. The drive back felt light, like the road had learned to breathe again. Halfway along the coast, my phone rang. "Evelyn? Clark Fund Foundation. I wanted to let you know, 5 students received full scholarships this year. Your donation made it possible." "5?" I said, smiling. "That's incredible. Your mother would be proud." "I hope so," I said, and meant it. Before I could even put the phone down, another call came through. My lawyer. "Evelyn, an offer came in on the villa." $3.4 million. "You want to review or sell it?" I said. A pause. "Half to the Breast Cancer Alliance?" "Yes. The rest to the foundation." The car stayed silent except for the sound of the waves. I didn't need to say more. That house had already served its purpose. "That house gave me closure," I said quietly. "Now it'll give others hope." By sunset, I was standing on a bluff in Big Sur. Lot 7, the same one Ethan and I had talked about years ago. It wasn't empty anymore. The soil was marked with wooden stakes, outlines of a home not yet built. Ethan walked beside me, the wind catching his hair. "The builders start next month," he said. "You still want to keep it open?" "No walls between the kitchen and living space?" "Yes," I said. "Space for air and light." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands resting where mine had been all day. "You ready for this next one?" I smiled. "I think so. Maybe for once I'm building before something breaks." He kissed the top of my head. The ocean behind us glowed like the world had just begun again. You always find a way to make things whole, he said. I just stopped fighting the cracks, I answered. We stayed there until the light faded, until the sky turned the same soft color my mother used to paint in her seascapes. Later that night, back in Los Angeles, I stood on our balcony. The city stretched wide and alive below me. Lights, hums, all the noise that used to feel too loud. Now it felt like music. I leaned against the railing, barefoot, hair loose, one hand resting over my stomach. A faint kick made me laugh out loud. Inside, sketches of the Big Sur house covered the table. Floor plans, notes, coffee stains from late nights. Next to them, a stack of letters from scholarship students, folded neatly. On top of it all, my mother's photo. The same one I'd kept since the funeral. I picked it up and looked at her face. It's funny, Mom, I said quietly. You always said nothing stays new. I guess you were right. Things fade, people change. But if you care for them, they come back to life. I set the photo down and looked out at the city again. The traffic moved like water, steady and endless. She sold my mother's necklace, I said, half to the night, half to myself. I sold her illusion. The words didn't sting this time. They just existed, soft, clean. My phone buzzed once more, a message from Maya, my assistant at the studio. A photo of the new apprentices standing beneath the quote on the wall, "Everything valuable deserves protection." Her caption read, "We keep restoring, always." I typed back, "Always." Then I turned off the screen and set it face down. I didn't need to see more light tonight. I'd made enough of it on my own. The city kept breathing. The night kept its rhythm. Inside, Ethan moved somewhere, humming the same tune I'd heard from the villa window that morning. I touched the emerald ring, the one I bought after everything, and thought of how far I'd come from the girl who once whispered her plans in the dark. Now I spoke them out loud, built them, lived them. I took a deep breath and said softly, "That's how I made peace. Not through revenge, but through restoration." Then I smiled. Small, simple, the kind that lasts. And if you're still here, listening, tell me, would you have done the same? Drop your thoughts below. Like, share, comment what peace means to you, because maybe that's all any of us are doing, trying to make something whole again, one quiet moment at a time.